A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
Welcome. You're watching I-24 News coming to you live from Tel Aviv. The US Special Envoy Amos Hochstein has called for a diplomatic solution to the conflict between Israel and the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah. Hochstein was in Beirut this afternoon following a visit to Israel yesterday. Our Jody Notilovitz has the latest.
As a result of the escalation in cross-border fire between Hezbollah and the IDF along Lebanon's southern border in recent weeks, U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein has been dispatched in an attempt to ease tensions, paying visits to both countries this week. Following meetings in Jerusalem on Monday and Beirut on Tuesday, Hochstein said Washington is looking to avoid the, quote, greater war.
That is the effort here. It will take everyone's interest in ending this conflict now, and we believe that there is a pathway diplomatically to do it, if the sides agree to it.
Last month, U.S. President Joe Biden outlined a truce proposal, which Hochstein said would ultimately be the end of the conflict in Gaza, adding that a swift diplomatic solution is both necessary and attainable.
A ceasefire in Gaza and/or an alternative diplomatic solution could also bring the conflict across the blue line to an end, creating conditions for displaced Lebanese civilians to go home in the south and for Israeli civilians to go home in their north.
After a meeting with Hochstein, the Prime Minister of Lebanon said his country was not interested in further escalation. The question, however, is whether the pro-Iranian Hezbollah terror group is.
So just how is that visit impacting the situation on the ground? Let's go to the north of Israel now and our correspondent, Zach Andrews. So, Zach, has it been calmer on the border following that very high-profile diplomatic visit?
Well, it seems like as soon as he left, the fire began again. And this was a few days worth of calm on the northern border with no red alerts coming across, no attacks reported. Hezbollah also did not claim responsibility for any attacks since early morning hours of Sunday morning. So we had a full two-day, 48-hour window of calm here. And then as Hochstein is leaving Beirut after this meeting with the caretaking prime minister, other diplomatic officials, the attacks begin again. We saw a wave, it looks like, of two in close order in the span of about an hour. No reports of casualties, no reports of damage, although some small fires started. It does appear that both are contained now.
And, of course, we've had this very alarming drone footage that Hezbollah has published showing various sites in the north of Israel, including Haifa port. I mean, how worried should Israel be about that?
Yeah, and you know, this is one of those things that kind of falls a bit more into my background, so I've been poring over this footage. I am convinced that this is a commercial drone that you can buy online, a DJI drone. With the way that the image looks and the way that the drone is moving. You see the frame move a bit like the drone itself is hovering and then tilting or panning just slightly. Some of these DJI drones that you can buy online now can fit in the palm of your hand, and they can fly up to 2,000–3,000 feet into the air, go about 20 miles an hour, but they're very small. So it would be something that would show up the size of a bird on radar, probably wouldn't even show up on some of these radar, even given how sensitive they are, depending on where this is in the sky, it might not even show up. So it's not something that would be traditionally presented to be intercepted necessarily, so could fly over these areas like Haifa. What is very alarming is to see these images over the port, over Israeli naval craft. That's certainly alarming. Over some of these Air Force sites, some of these Iron Dome batteries, it seems like Hezbollah has got it all. Now, we just don't know when this footage was taken. And, you know, my photographer mentioned something interesting as well, that there's not a lot of depth of field in some of these images. It also looks like it could have been used from Google Earth in some of these scenes as well.
Interesting. All right, Zach, thank you very much indeed. Zach Andrews there up in the north of Israel. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Ruth Wasserman-Landa is a former member of the Knesset, and she's a research fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security. Good to see you, Ruth.
Lovely to see you,
as always. So do you have any hope that Amos Hochstein might be able to calm down this conflict and bring some kind of diplomatic resolution?
I respect Mr. Hochstein, and unfortunately I don't think that Hezbollah may be convinced to truly stand by any agreement. It hasn't done so in the past. For the past years, it has been infringing upon the border, despite the fact that it's not supposed to, according to the international arena. And therefore, respecting international agreements is not its strong side. I don't believe it has an incentive to do so either, that the Americans can bring. Lebanon, on the other hand, as a state, does have an incentive to prevent a war. However, the Hezbollah is very deeply entrenched in Lebanon, and of course representing foreign interests of Iran, which is the sad truth of what Iran does in different countries in the region. That is disembark on this journey of I don't even know what to call it. It's something completely unstable, completely ripping a country apart, making it completely irresponsive to anything that can make it truly stand up to any kind of obstacle. And then it actually takes over, which is exactly what it did in Syria, in Lebanon, in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Yemen, in Iraq, and so on and so forth.
Some analysts say that the Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah, has kind of backed himself into a corner a little bit because he has tied the attacks on Israel to the war in Gaza. And until there's an end to the fighting there, he feels obliged to keep attacking Israel. Do you see anything there?
I don't think it has anything to do with an obligation. I think it has to do with a pre-planned master plan of Iran, and that is to first and foremost take interest away from its own self in order to be able to continue with its nuclear program. Second of all, to, again, destroy any kind of roadmap, journey, beginning of a path between Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia, engaging in any kind of combined effort against Iran and its cronies, and, of course, in terms of its energy and so on. And Israel is a wonderful pawn upon which to galvanize support, or against which to galvanize support, because there are enough anti-Semites and enough Arabs in the world that hate Israel and wish for their destruction, and therefore this would be a first step onto its ideological war with the West, and that's where it's heading.
All right, Ruth, for now, thank you very much. Well, let's bring in Anshal Vora. She's international affairs columnist at Foreign Policy magazine. Thank you for being with us, Anshal. So it's not his first visit to Lebanon, is it? Is Special Envoy Amos Hochstein liked in Lebanon? Is he trusted? Is he seen as someone who can neutrally broker a deal?
Well, it's not really about him, is it? It's about him being an American representative, and the expectation amongst Lebanese people is that America is going to make sure, or will play an instrumental role in making sure, that there is no war between Israel and Lebanon. Now, there I'm talking about Lebanon as in most Lebanese people, I think, expect this from America. It's a complicated relationship. They expect essentially this from the international community. Now, whether he can stop it or not is a very different question. I think a lot of it depends on what Hezbollah wants to do. And so far, if you look at Hezbollah's actions, the way I look at Hezbollah's actions at least, it's clear that they do not want a full-scale war. They will keep responding and they will keep attacking parts of Israel in a way that it does not provoke Israel to unleash a full-scale war, but so they can tell their own constituency that they are a resistance force, because this legitimizes their presence inside Lebanon and gives them a reason to operate in the region as well.
Do you think that Hassan Nasrallah has kind of painted himself into a corner a little bit in that he has tied his attacks on Israel to the war in Gaza?
No, I don't think so. I think they're quite sort of clear in what their outlook is. They support Hamas and they support armed resistance of Palestinians. So, they've got a very clear narrative. They say, we're going to back this side. And this is also, this is one of the reasons they exist is, they claim they exist because they want Palestinians to get their land back, and in that effort they're backing Hamas. So for them it's very sort of, to launch a few attacks on Israel is not difficult for them, and I don't think Nasrallah's painted in a corner. I think there are other things that could perhaps could corner him, and those would have to do more with Iran and how cornered Iran feels.
What options, what proposals are on the table right now? Do you see anything, Anshal, that could prevent an all-out war between Hezbollah and Lebanon at this point?
Well, my analysis is, and I've been talking to a lot of people on the ground, but also, other analysts and experts, and I think there's a bit of a consensus amongst experts, at least, that Hezbollah does not want a war, and if it would come, it would perhaps be launched from Israel's side. Now, what Israelis want now is what they've been wanting for a long time, which is for Hezbollah to move back, to go on the other side of the Litani River, which Hezbollah does not. In that border area, officially it is the Lebanese army, but Hezbollah fighters are there, and in many cases there's also cooperation between Hezbollah and the Lebanese army. So these things concern Israel. It's not really as much about all the bombing that we see, but more about in the future if Hezbollah could launch a similar attack as Hamas did. This is what concerns Israel, and Israel has a right to be concerned there, having Hezbollah in its neighborhood. But from what we gather, Hezbollah does not have plans to have a full-scale war with Israel. It just wants to keep it going on because it serves its purposes. It serves its purposes. It allows Hezbollah to say, look, I have a reason to exist. This is the reason I need to keep arms. This is why I need to be an armed entity and yet be a political entity in a state, and in that sense, hold it to ransom. So this is a part of a much more insidious strategy than actually just attacking Israel. This is about control of Lebanon.
All right, Anshal, thank you. Stay with us. Ruth Wasserman-Land, if you'd like to comment on that.
First of all, I'm very respectful of this opinion. I think that very wise things have been said. I agree with the fact that perhaps at this point in time, there isn't a wish by Hezbollah to enter into a full-blown war, but there is a plan in the future, as was masterminded by Iran, to enter Israel and perpetrate similar atrocities that were perpetrated in the south of Israel. And had they done that in time, or if they are planning to do it at a specific surprise time, yes, there is a concern in Israel, and a very grounded concern that maintains that, exactly as the commentator had said, the Hezbollah should move away from the border. There should be a no man's land, exactly as has been stated by international agreements. Literally, the Hezbollah is looking into the living rooms of houses on the border within Israel of Israeli citizens. This is insanity.
Well, Anshal, if you're still with us, do you agree with that? Is this in some part the fault of the international community, because it has never managed to enforce Resolution 1701? It's never managed to keep Hezbollah back out of the zone where it's supposed to operate?
Well, this can be a very long conversation, and there are rarely any such disputes where international community manages to succeed, right? It's about the lives of two peoples here. It's Israeli people, it's Lebanese people, well, three peoples, it's Palestinian people. So I don't know to what extent can we actually deliberate on whether international community has failed to succeed. This is really about Palestinians' struggle inside Israel and Israel's yearning for security. And on the side, you've got Lebanon and this group in Lebanon, Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran, which says it's there because Israel invaded Lebanon twice. And perhaps that is partly true, but it has remained armed all these years in Lebanon, also because, well, I would say maybe it enjoys it, maybe it gives its power. And that's what it's really about, isn't it? They don't want to go back because they lose power. They want something in return. What are they going to get in return? They claim what they want is for Israel and Palestinians, for Palestinians to have their piece of land. I mean, if they said they wanted Israel and Palestinians to make peace, it would be a very different story. So I don't know if I want to sit and cast aspersions on the international community. Could they have done better? Perhaps. But I think these groups are quite ideological and in a way have their own political aims too. So this is not about the international community. This is about the bigger geopolitical battles at play, and Hezbollah is a part of it. Iran is a much bigger part of it.
Okay, Anshal Vora at Foreign Policy Magazine, thank you very much indeed. Ruth Wasserman, thanks to you as well. And as we were speaking, sirens blaring in Israel's northern communities as more missiles fired from across the border. Well, to other news, a French court has overturned a ban on Israeli citizens and arms companies from taking part in an international defence fair in Paris. The initial decision has already taken a toll on relations with France, as our Guy Azriel now reports.
Eurosatory is one of the largest international exhibitions for land and air-land defense and security. For Israel, where defense industries are a central component of the high-tech sector, this is a particularly significant event. But this year, Israelis were initially not welcomed, after a district court in France ordered to bar Israeli arms companies, Israeli delegates, and intermediaries from attending the event. Although the decision was reversed on Tuesday, it is still a severe blow to 74 Israeli companies that were slated to take part at the exhibition, among them Attis Aviation, a small startup company dedicated to unmanned aerial vehicle development.
As a small company, we are considering very carefully our expenses. The purpose of us to go to the exhibition was to meet with end users and to find investors to invest in our company, if it's corporate companies or individual investors that are looking for startups to invest in. We are currently in the seed fundraising campaign, and therefore this was one of our main goals in this exhibition. We also booked tickets, hotels in the Paris area, because we are a small company, so we went for the low cost. Low cost usually cannot cancel, and now we lost all those expenses.
The initial ruling by the French court extended a previous decision by the government to ban the participation of Israeli companies in the exhibition, allegedly over Israel's military activity in Rafah.
It's discrimination against everything. Based on what? Based on completely exaggerated accusations, unfounded accusations, slander.
So the first decision of the French government, it was said it's because the war in Gaza. And basically it's obviously from the false or the wrong narrative of the pro-Palestinian organizations. But the second decision that no Israeli citizens or representatives of Israeli companies can enter the exhibition, this already is a different decision. We see this decision as an anti-Israeli decision, even anti-Semitic decision.
The Israel ban at Eurosatory was only the latest in a series of unfriendly French policies against Israel since the start of the war. Earlier last week, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant slammed President Macron's initiative to establish a trilateral task force to defuse tensions with Hezbollah in Lebanon, saying, quote, "As we fight a just war, defending our people, France has adopted hostile policies against Israel.
On a diplomatic level, it is impossible to put such a hostile decision on the agenda in a Western country, an ally country. It should have consequences. The French government must pay a diplomatic price for its conduct.
Regardless of the reversal of the ban, the entire saga shows that the war is also shifting to the business sector, and this front is heating up every day.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration is moving ahead with a plan to sell $18 billion worth of F-15 fighter jets to Israel. Top lawmakers had blocked the deal because of the war in Gaza. Let's get more on that now with our senior US correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, joining us live from New York. So, Mike, Representative Meeks and others blocked the transfer of weapons. They said they had concerns about what they were being used for in Gaza. Why did they change their minds?
Likely a combination of a few different factors. Number one, they wanted more information, essentially, on what the F-15s, and it's a pretty well-known, jet, a pretty well-known piece of equipment. It's not top secret or anything like that, but they wanted to know exactly the Israeli Air Force's plans for the new squadron of F-15s that are going to be ordered here. There was concern about, the last batch of bombs that were withheld and their use in Rafah in large-scale and largely populated districts. They wanted to make sure that the F-15s weren't going to be used in potentially similar situations. Quite obviously, that's not going to be the case in Gaza. And by the way, these jets are, some 5 years away from delivery to begin with. God willing, the Gaza war will be over by then. So I think their concerns were alleviated through some additional conversations. Beside that, it appears, at least according to some sources of some major outlets here in the United States, that there was some arm twisting by the Biden administration to get this done, to show that there weren't more weapons being withheld, which would have caused an even bigger kerfuffle. These aren't bombs that are going to be dropped tomorrow. These are F-15s that are going to be used years from now. There's just no sense in creating more tension and more animosity between Jerusalem and Washington right now unnecessarily. So I think a combination of those two factors finally got the job done.
And that decision to slow weapons deliveries to Israel, even temporarily, caused a great deal of anguish here, especially with the threats from the north, from Hezbollah. I mean, are we looking now at a situation where Israel can relax a bit more when it looks at its relationship with the United States and that supply of weapons, or could this be something that happens every few years?
There's so much unknown right now in the U.S.-Israel relationship. The presidential election is coming up. Who knows how quickly an election will come up in Israel? Who knows how deep and how regional this war is going to be? There are so many factors at play right now that it's just impossible to make that kind of assessment. Right now, everything is in the near-term focus. And I think that's where Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant and et al. Are trying to focus their attention right now, is making sure that the weapons that are supposed to be in Israel tomorrow, next month, in the coming months, get there in time. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu described this bottleneck, he said, of weaponry that he was promised by Secretary of State Tony Blinken will finally be freed up. Blinken countered that there is no such bottleneck, that it's only those one set of heavy bombs that were held under review, and he knows of no other situation other than that. But he was asked specifically about the promise that he apparently made to Prime Minister Netanyahu to get those weapons flowing again. He said he's not going to discuss anything that was talked about in a private diplomatic conversation. So it is what it is at this point. Some wounds are self-inflicted, but hopefully cooler heads will prevail here going forward on both sides of the equation.
Mike, thanks very much. Mike Wagenheim there in New York. Now, relief and happiness. That's how the young Air Force pilot who helped rescue 3 hostages from Gaza felt when he saw Andrei, Almog and Shlomi for the first time. Astonishing bravery from the pilot, who is just 26 years old. More in this report.
I knew the amount of hostages that were supposed to be released, and I didn't know their names because of the sensitive of this operation. Very few people in the army knew the names and the identity of the hostages that were supposed to be released. Thanks to the excellent ground troops that we have inside Gaza Strip, our landing and our loading of the 3 hostages lasted less than 1 minute. When I first saw the three hostages, Shlomi, Almog, and Andrei, walking in the helicopter, I felt relief and happiness that surrounded the whole team, the whole helicopter team that were in this mission. As we were landing in Gaza coast, I looked back and I saw the three hostages coming in the helicopter. I looked at Shlomi, and as soon as we took off, I looked him in the eyes and I gave him thumbs up, wanted to signal him that it's all right, he's coming home. And well, I remember this feeling since the operation. I can't stop thinking about it. During the flight to the hospital, I looked back and I saw Shlomi looking out of the window. So I asked the crew chief that was beside him if Shlomi wants to get in the cockpit and talk with us. So we let him in. We gave him an earphones, and we had a 10-minute conversation with an hostage that just released from captivity. We didn't talk about the captivity. We talked about what we see. I explained him about the helicopter. I told him it's a pretty simple helicopter, and we shared a pretty special moment. The entire team and Shlomi in this flight. Yeah. Almog and Andrei were extremely happy. They were sitting here looking out of the window and seeing Israel from the air after 8 months of being held in Hamas captivity, and they were extremely happy and joyful. Yeah, I feel honored and privileged to be a part of an operation that eventually managed to bring back 4 hostages back to their families and their loved ones. June 8th, the day of the operation, was my birthday, and I'm positive that it's the best present that I could get.
Incredible story. All right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, an unnamed Israeli official has claimed that dozens of hostages in Gaza are still alive, but that Israel can't agree to end the war until all of them are freed. We'll have more on that next. Stay with us.
Israel's story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Welcome back. Dozens of hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza are still alive, but Israel can't agree to end the war until all the hostages are freed. That's according to a senior Israeli negotiator who spoke to the AFP news agency anonymously. This official also said that Israel believes most of the hostages are being held by Hamas and not by civilians or other terrorist groups. Well, meanwhile, ex-hostage Amit Susana has been describing the sexual abuse she endured during her time in captivity. More in this report by Emma Siegel.
Taken from her home on October 7th, held by Hamas for 55 days, enduring horrific abuse, becoming the first hostage to speak about the sexual violence she endured in captivity, and now speaking out at a White House conference marking International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence and Conflict. This is former hostage Amit Susana.
As difficult as it is for me to speak out, to talk to you about this very private, intimate experience that happened to me, it is far more difficult to stay silent. I don't see myself as a victim. I am a strong, independent woman, and no one can change that. The sexual assault I experienced should never happen to any human being, under any circumstances. I must speak about the horrible things that are probably still happening there to innocent women and men. My recovery depends on the rescue of my sisters and brothers who are still there. My wounds cannot even begin to heal as long as their suffering continues.
The event was hosted by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, who mirrored Susana's concerns, saying that testimonies of Hamas's use of sexual violence will only increase when additional hostages are released.
In the days after October 7, I saw images of bloodied Israeli women abducted. Then it came to light that Hamas committed rape and gang rape at the Nova Music Festival. And I just met with Amit, a survivor who has bravely come forward with her account of sexual violence while she was held captive by Hamas. These testimonies, I fear, will only increase as more hostages are released.
This comes amid emerging reports that an anonymous senior Israeli negotiator told AFP that dozens of hostages are alive with certainty. This conflicts with Hamas's statement that the terror organization has no idea how many hostages are still alive, and a report from U.S. officials in April estimating that most of the Gaza hostages are dead. The senior Israeli negotiator further said that we cannot leave them in there for a long time, they will die. Outrage from the Israeli public continues to grow as a deal to return the hostages remains elusive. Hostage families have been holding near daily protests, both to return the hostages and to call for the dissolution of the current Netanyahu government.
The last 8 months have been an emotional roller coaster for me and the other hostage families, and I think that without a struggle and without the protest, this deal will also be put down, and we're here to tell the government and shout for them to close the deal and to bring them home.
And while pressure for a deal continues to mount, a newly surfaced document has revealed that the IDF and intelligence systems knew of Hamas's plan to kidnap residents of southern Israel, weeks before the October 7th massacre took place. The document, titled End-to-End Raid Training, was distributed in mid-September and described in detail the series of exercises conducted by Hamas's elite fighter units and the expected number of hostages they would take, between 200 and 250 people. On October 7th, Hamas kidnapped some 250 Israeli and foreign nationals to Gaza. And now, 8 months later, 120 hostages still remain in Hamas captivity, waiting to be brought home.
Well, it's the second day of a so-called week of disruption called by protesters who want to force the government to hold early elections and agree to a ceasefire deal with Hamas. At day 3, I should say. Let's go to Jerusalem. We're joined by our correspondent, Balir Sladin. Balir, what's happening?
So yes, let's take a look at what's happening here in front of the Knesset in Jerusalem. Hundreds of people, I would say even thousands of people already here. Thousands more are coming, so tens of thousands of people are going to be present here this day, and this is the third day in a row, as you said, in this week of resistance, as they call it, week of disruption that includes also blocking roads, as well as protesting in front of homes of ministers of the government, and of course every single day in a different place. Protest, a main protest this day is going to be in Jerusalem. Yesterday in this protest, many people has been arrested, 5 in number, and 3 even reached a hospital because of the clashes that erupted between the police and the protesters. For now, we're still, of course, waiting for the official beginning of this protest. Already some of the speakers are shouting slogans here on the stage, of course, anti the government, and they are saying that the main purpose of this protest is to call an early election, just like the early election that Benny Gantz talked about. And they're citing actually this specific issue of Gantz and Eisenkot resigning from the government, and they are saying now that every single decision that this government is taking is actually a political decision. They are mentioning many of the laws that they are against, specifically the law that calls for the Haredis not to serve, or allows the Haredis not to serve the ultra-Orthodox religious Jews, and they're saying that this is, of course, something that they cannot accept. So this is the third day of this week of resistance, week of disruption, and it's going to continue until Saturday, where the main protest, main demonstration takes place in Tel Aviv, just like it used to in the past few months as well.
Thank you very much, Balir Sladin there over in Jerusalem. Well, Ruth Wasserman-Land is with me in the studio, former MK and research fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security. So the war cabinet is no more. Benny Gantz left, as did Gadi Eisenkot. Prime Minister Netanyahu is looking increasingly isolated. Do you think elections are inevitable now?
Benjamin Netanyahu has created an alternative sort of small cabinet, so to speak, where decisions are being discussed a little bit more close, more tightly, close-knit kind of. He trusts more those people that are in the small cabinet, and there are very few. And there is the larger cabinet of ministers to whom he takes those talked about and chewed decisions, made up decisions already in order to vote upon them. It makes his life more difficult politically. The fact that former ministers Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot had left, of course, but he has not allowed Ben Gvir and Smotrich to be within the smaller cabinet to impact his true decisions as they had wished and as they had anticipated with the leaving of Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot. Elections, everything may happen here. The government may dissolve. There are serious issues with the demonstrations, with the displeasure of many, particularly in the situation of war, where the ultra-Orthodox are made by their own leadership not to serve in the army as a decision on the macro level, although several thousands do serve. But the issue is that any rivalry in and amongst us in Israel is a gift to our enemies.
So you think the protests are harmful?
For those that are in the protests, completely justified protests, but still, those within the protests and those from the government that sit in the government and promote laws that are making the rivalry even bigger. For example, laws that are quietly right now dealing with issues pertaining to the reform and the legal reform again, and issues pertaining to the election of rabbinical leaders in different cities, and issues pertaining to the non-service of those ultra-Orthodox youngsters. All of these issues, from the right, from the left, from the center, all of these disagreements and rivalries serve our enemies. And this pains those who care, and there are many who care about the country. There are people who are sitting and investing a lot of effort in psychological warfare and in those rivalries. They're investing money, they're investing social media efforts to make us fight one another and to disintegrate us from within. In fact, Iran has made this a speciality, by the way, learned from Russia.
Yes, disinformation and division, of course. But
Yes.
did you see a difference, Ruth, between the protests that we're seeing now? Because the polls show, the majority of people do want an election. They do want a change of leadership. They no longer trust this leadership.
Even people from the right want a change of leadership within the Likud. The issue is, and I'm not a political expert on Israel, I'm an expert on Arab affairs, but if I may divulge my own analysis, very often the fact that there are those demonstrations and they are so-called colored in the left colors by the leading coalition actually helps the coalition gain more support amidst right-wingers, so-called, in the country. By the way, many in the demonstrations are also from the right wing. People are sick and tired of this government, sick and tired not necessarily of a specific personality in the government, but all of the failures that have been related to this particular coalition, the lack of decisions, the lack of hope that Israelis so need. And therefore, the demonstrations are justified. Everything, the pain is justified, but the fact that they exist weakens the Israeli society and strengthens our enemies.
Well, this is a democracy, and democracy is messy, isn't it, Ruth? For now, thank you very much. Well, let's move to Iran. And the race to replace the late President Raisi has narrowed down to 6 candidates in a 4-hour live TV debate last night. The 6 hopefuls slugged it out on economic policy. Our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Iran, has more.
With only 10 days until Iran snapped presidential elections, the 6 candidates who were approved to run competed for the public's attention in the first of 5 live debates on economic issues and how to save Iran's spiraling economy.
The government needs to solve the sanction problem and lift the sanctions, to put effort into it. We have a detailed and specific program for the problem of sanctions.
The economic problems of Iran are not the cruel sanctions imposed by America, but rather is the US's prescriptions for the economy.
Out of the 6 candidates approved by Iran's Guardian Council, 5 are considered hardliners, close to the thinking of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The June 28th presidential elections were called after last month's helicopter crash that killed President Ibrahim Raisi, a hardline protege of Khamenei, once floated as his possible successor. The top contender is believed to be Iranian parliament speaker Mohammad Kalibaf. The 62-year-old former mayor of Tehran and IRGC senior commander enjoys a strong relationship with Ayatollah Khamenei's inner circle.
I believe that a strong president with strong religious and trustworthy managers with good track records can definitely control inflation.
Another frontrunner is Saeed Jalili, a former secretary of the Supreme National Security Council and nuclear negotiator, thought to be a favorite of Khamenei.
Today, the country has tremendous opportunities, but the requirement for such global opportunity is an Iranian leap. And Iran can leap, and we can hopefully see this 8% growth in the next 4 years as part of the 5-year plan.
Perhaps the most interesting candidate is reformist Masoud Pezeshkian, a relative moderate who enjoys the support of former President Mohammad Khatami.
For economic growth of 8%, we need $200 billion every year. Under the current conditions, that's impossible. Establishing relations with the outside world is a necessity to realize this goal.
While Pezeshkian is largely seen as a fig leaf for reformists, the list of candidates represents the supreme leader's purge of the Iranian system as he sets his sights towards his own succession. And with such a choice of candidates, it is unlikely that these elections will generate much excitement or a high turnout among Iranians.
Well, meanwhile, US and Israeli intelligence officials are looking into new information about computer modelling by Iranian scientists that could be used for the research and development of nuclear weapons. That's according to a report in Axios. It will be the first high-level discussions between the US and Israel about Iran's nuclear programme since March of last year. So, Ruth, Prime Minister Netanyahu has accepted an invitation to speak at Congress next month. Last time he did that, of course, was to completely undercut President Obama's Iran policy. Can we imagine that's going to be on the agenda this time?
Well, I have a slight feeling somewhat that the Biden administration isn't too pleased. In fact, the Democratic representatives have already made plans to undermine this visit. So whether it will be conducive or not, that's to be seen. However, messaging to the Congress is nonetheless important to a significant degree, because we need the Congress, we need the US. We cannot move within the region significantly with the challenges that we're facing without it. And yet there are certain issues that are certainly unfixed, because there are serious divisions of thought amidst the Israeli decision makers, by the way, not left or right, but in general, and the American current administration. So it's a very sticky issue. By the way, you asked about the Iranian nuclear deal. To me, there's no question that this whole plan, the whole region is up in fire. And by the way, not only the region, it's the entire world. Because one of the reasons, not the only one, but one of the reasons is to truly take away the attention of the world from the nuclear program of Iran.
Which is managed to do.
Absolutely. And there is a huge issue, because we are being exhausted fighting the arms of this antagonist. And we should stop for 1 second and strategically look at the mastermind. And the mastermind is, without a doubt, Iran. By the way, the true enemy is the United States of America. And this is key to understand. This is key to understand. This is before everything else, before any other analysis. No other sentence is as important to that. The key protagonist in the issue, in the whole act, is Iran. And the hugest enemy, the biggest enemy that it has centered and focused its attention on is the United States of America.
Ruth, for now, thank you very much. Well, the United States has just designated an Iranian-backed militia in Iraq as a terrorist group, but the group Harakat Ansar Allah al-Awfiya, or HAAA, says it will wear the designation as a badge of honour. The group is one of a number of shadow groups affiliated with Iran's Revolutionary Guards, and they've been attacking US interests dozens of times since October 7th. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Colonel Rich Outzen, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Great to see you, Colonel Outzen. Thank you for being with us. So this is the group that the US says was behind that attack on a military base in Jordan in January, in which 3 US service members were killed. Why has it taken until now for the government to act?
Well, part of the reason is that we have a very slow bureaucracy, and the considerations of which group has met technical considerations and criteria to be designated formally and legally sometimes take a few weeks and a few dozen meetings. So that's the bureaucratic aspect. But to me, the fact that the group is HA is sort of appropriate in this case, because a formal and legal designation really doesn't do much. We've got lots of terror groups that are designated. And of course, diplomatic designations, legal designations are part of a package to show seriousness, but in and of themselves not that serious. You have to look at what economic and what military steps are being taken. And so far, with regards to this group, and the group itself is fungible. It's like one hat of many that these Iranian proxies in Iraq can wear from time to time. So what's more important is how hard we strike back, rather than whether we designate them as a terror group.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. How many more groups are there like this in Iraq, and what is the US doing to defeat them? What is the grand plan here?
Well, there's at least a dozen, and I think that the personnel sometimes shift between the groups, as does funding and weaponry. There are, on occasion, strong deterrent steps. I mean, we can go back, of course, to the targeting of Qasem Soleimani under the previous administration, but even under the current administration, in February, there were strikes, deadly strikes against fairly senior leaders in Baghdad to demonstrate immediately after the attacks that you referenced that was a no-no, that was a red line. And yet all these other sort of harassing attacks against Israel and towards U.S. bases that have not been as serious really are only getting a very slight reprisal. There was the attack in Yemen, for instance, where we did hit some, there was a series of airstrikes by the U.S. and U.K. to hit back after Yemeni-based terrorists attacked shipping. But note that it's entirely retaliatory. This is not a strategy. This is a tit for tat. And frankly, that doesn't have great deterrent value.
And talking of deadly strikes, the US and the UK have carried out more limited airstrikes on the Houthis in Yemen. Are these strikes making any difference, Rich?
I don't think so. I think that there's sort of a pain threshold you have to get above in order to achieve deterrence. And it's been a longstanding criticism of mine towards this administration that it fails to fundamentally understand escalation dynamics. When you have a small asymmetric group like the Houthis, who really don't even run a state, they get sort of a huge bump in credibility with their own terror backers and sponsors from being able to take direct action against the United States and Western shipping, even if it's not that deadly when they do it. So to change that calculus, you have to really cause them some pain. You have to kill senior leaders. You have to destroy something of value to them. And hitting a couple of installations or launch points in Yemen, well, it is significant that we're hitting at targets in Yemen. And even if they kill a few people, though, this is not the pain threshold necessary for deterrence. So, again, it smacks of sort of a formalistic response that says, yes, we can tolerate their attacks. We have to look like we're doing something, but we're not actually going to cause pain significant enough to make the Houthis stop doing what they're doing. So in my book, it's insufficient.
Colonel Rich Outzen, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you.
Now, one of the last of a handful of Jews surviving in Yemen has died. Yahya ben Yosef was thought to be over 100 years old. He lived north of the city of Sana'a and was buried by his Muslim neighbours. Once a thriving community dating back thousands of years, the Jewish community in Yemen has all but disappeared. Another Jewish man in Yemen, Levi Marhabi, was captured by the Houthis and tortured. Well, joining me now, Yirmiyahu Danzig is an Israeli activist and digital educator. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. And Yahya ben Yosef refused to follow the tens of thousands of other Yemenite Jews who came to Israel in the 1940s. It must have been something of a lonely existence for him.
Certainly that was the case. And, you know, I think that many of us take for granted that period in history in which the entire communities throughout the Middle East, North Africa, Jewish communities were basically completely wiped off of the map. And it was not just because these Jewish communities, like Jewish communities all over the world, were longing and waiting for the opportunity to go to Zion. It's mostly because they were ethnically cleansed, expelled, pressured to leave their homes and to lose all of their possessions. And so, you know, many of us, people living in diaspora Jewish communities throughout the world, think about how complicated it is to leave your home, your house, the people that you know, the customs that you're used to. And so Mori, or Rabbi Yahya, was one such Jew that refused to leave his home, though there are some reports, rumors that he was trying to moved to Israel, but because of bureaucratic issues, he was unable to, and he passed away in what we believe was close to or even past the age of 100.
And given all of that, it was interesting and touching, perhaps, to see that his Muslim neighbours gave him a proper burial, especially given how hard life has been for Jews in Yemen, and especially since the Houthi takeover. That was something quite touching to see, wasn't it?
Certainly, and notwithstanding systemic anti-Semitism that Jews in the past and present receive from some of these regimes, particularly in governments or organizations that are proxies of the Iranian regime in Iran, Lebanon, and in Yemen. Local relations between neighbors, between people that have been living alongside each other for generations, have always been full of their beautiful moments alongside more complicated situations. And so many people within the Yemenite Jewish community in Israel, including family members of his, were very happy to see the men of his village, non-Jews, carrying his body wrapped in a talit, in a prayer shawl, and giving him a respectful burial.
And it is very sad, isn't it? This is the end of a very long history. The Jewish community in Yemen dates back thousands of years. Luckily, the Yemenites have managed to preserve their culture and traditions here in Israel.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the numbers estimate between 400 to 450,000 Yemenite Jews in Israel, and that cultural contribution, whether it's in music and food, can be felt everywhere in Israeli society. It could be that there are still some individual Jews in Yemen. It's hard to know because many of them, for good reason, are very afraid of what the Houthi regime might do to them. Because as you brought up in the beginning, we can't forget Levi Marhabi, a Jew who is still being held by the Houthis in horrible circumstances after dealing with terrible torture. And so it could be that there's still some individual Jews that are holding on and keeping that spark alive of thousands of years of Jewish history.
All right. Yirmiyahu Danzig, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And Ruth Wasserman is with me. So Yemen's loss, Israel's gain, I guess.
First of all, Israel's gain, but we do have to understand the role of Jewish communities throughout the world. There's a role for them as well. The Jewish diaspora, they're doing amazing things all over the world, and keeping strong the identity and it's generations of life that actually keep the Jewish nation and the Jewish peoplehood as a people strong. And I feel that also in the sense of making other nations understand, in a manner of speaking, what Jews are, in fact, is easier when you see Jews, when you know Jews, when you come across Jews. Yes, it doesn't take away the anti-Semitism, which is horrific, and it has raised its ugly head recently very much. But it is much easier to hate when there are no Jews, and then the other is demonized in a way that's even worse. And there are many examples to show that.
It's sad to see another community completely extinguished like that. They will
actually, the vast majority of the Jewish communities in the Arab world, not completely, but the vast majority have been extinguished, tortured, sent out.
Very sad. All right. Well, Ruth, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you very much, Ruth Wasserman.
Thank you.
Thanks to you for watching. That brings us to the end of the show. Do stay with us at I24 News. Benita Levin is up next. Good night.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I24 News.
I24 News launches its 4th channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I24 News.
This is Breaking News Edition. I'm Benita Levine. 257 days in captivity at the hands of terrorists in Gaza. Right now, the fate of 120 Israeli hostages remains unclear, but an Israeli negotiator is shedding some light. The anonymous source telling AFP that dozens of hostages are alive and that most of them are being held by the Hamas terror group. He also says Israel cannot accept stopping the war until all captives are released in a ceasefire hostage release deal. But that deal remains elusive, with Hamas wanting to make adjustments to President Joe Biden's three-phase Israeli proposal to end the war. Separately, disturbing reports emerging that Israeli intelligence was aware of the Hamas plan to abduct scores of Israelis from southern Israel weeks before October 7th. But that intelligence apparently didn't get to the upper echelons of the security establishment. The Gaza Division and the Intelligence Corps reportedly had documents outlining details of the planned assault. This report sparking outrage, questions again surfacing around the chain of command and communication within the Israeli defense sector. Meanwhile, more horrifying details of captivity are emerging. Amit Susana, who was released in the first hostage deal, sharing some of her ordeal at a White House conference, urging strong action to get all the hostages home. More in this report by our Emma Siegel.
Taken from her home on October 7th, held by Hamas for 55 days, enduring horrific abuse, becoming the first hostage to speak about the sexual violence she endured in captivity, and now speaking out at a White House conference marking International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence and Conflict. This is former hostage Amit Susana.
As difficult as it is for me to speak out, to talk to you about this very private, intimate experience that happened to me, it is far more difficult to stay silent. I don't see myself as a victim. I am a strong, independent woman, and no one can change that. The sexual assault I experienced should never happen to any human being, under any circumstances. I must speak about the horrible things that are probably still happening there to innocent women and men. My recovery depends on the rescue of my sisters and brothers who are still there. My wounds cannot even begin to heal as long as their suffering continues.
The event was hosted by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, who mirrored Susana's concerns, saying that testimonies of Hamas's use of sexual violence will only increase when additional hostages are released.
In the days after October 7, I saw images of bloodied Israeli women abducted. Then it came to light that Hamas committed rape and gang rape at the Nova Music Festival. And I just met with Amit, a survivor who has bravely come forward with her account of sexual violence while she was held captive by Hamas. These testimonies, I fear, will only increase as more hostages are released.
This comes amid emerging reports that an anonymous senior Israeli negotiator told AFP that dozens of hostages are alive with certainty. This conflicts with Hamas's statement that the terror organization has no idea how many hostages are still alive, and a report from U.S. officials in April estimating that most of the Gaza hostages are dead. The senior Israeli negotiator further said that we cannot leave them in there for a long time, they will die. Outrage from the Israeli public continues to grow as a deal to return the hostages remains elusive. Hostage families have been holding near daily protests, both to return the hostages and to call for the dissolution of the current Netanyahu government.
The last 8 months have been an emotional rollercoaster for me and the other hostage families, and I think that without a struggle and without the protest, this deal will also be put down, and we're here to tell the government and shout for them to close the deal and to bring them home.
And while pressure for a deal continues to mount, a newly surfaced document has revealed that the IDF and intelligence systems knew of Hamas's plan to kidnap residents of southern Israel, weeks before the October 7th massacre took place. The document, titled End-to-End Raid Training, was distributed in mid-September and described in detail the series of exercises conducted by Hamas's elite fighter units and the expected number of hostages they would take, between 200 and 250 people. On October 7th, Hamas kidnapped some 250 Israeli and foreign nationals to Gaza. And now, 8 months later, 120 hostages still remain in Hamas captivity, waiting to be brought home.
More than 8 months. And now for more. It's a pleasure to welcome to studio Avi Pazner, a former Israeli ambassador to France and Italy and the former world chairman of Keren Hayasod, the United Israel Appeal, and Benjamin Anthony, the CEO and founder of the Miriam Institute. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. An important day, much to discuss. I want to start with the information given to AFP by an apparent negotiator for Israel, saying that dozens of hostages are alive. I mean, now we know Hamas is not giving proof of life. We don't even have a list in terms of how many people are being held, where they're being held, who's holding them. Your take on this latest information?
First of all, Benita, I'm relieved to hear that dozens of hostages are alive, because, you know, there were big question marks on this question. Of course, this is not an official statement, and the Hamas, in its cruelty, has never given any number of dead and alive. I even don't speak about the names. But this should give us, together with the testimony we heard now from this woman who has been sexually abused.
Amit Susana, incredibly brave.
And who is not afraid to talk about it publicly. And she is doing a great service, because now we are more aware of what's going on now, and we are more committed to get the other women and men out of this living hell. And we have to apply more pressure. You see that the Hamas has rejected the plan, actually. Already 2 weeks that they give conditions which are unacceptable to Israel, end of the war, complete withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, knowing perfectly well nobody will accept that. So what is the answer? More pressure. More military pressure, especially in the Rafah and maybe in the Khan Yunis area where Sinwar is hiding. More diplomatic pressure. I heard a day or two ago that Qatar is thinking about expelling the Hamas leadership. This comes as a result of pressure. I mean, we have to apply more pressure everywhere to get these people out of this hell.
Benjamin, what does that pressure look like?
Well, first of all, I'm sick and tired of these leaks. I don't actually commend any negotiator who's privy to some of the most delicate talks in the history of the State of Israel, who's put in a position of great trust by not only the Prime Minister of the State of Israel and the War Cabinet at various points before it was disbanded, but also, of course, by the parents and the family members of hostages who are being held inside dungeons inside the Gaza Strip. What possible virtue, what new light has he shed on the situation by leaking to the Associated Press this very vague idea that there are dozens of hostages still alive? Surely we're already fighting as though we are seeking to bring back the maximum possible number of hostages alive that we are able to do. Surely we're already negotiating with all of the intensity that we're able to muster in order to bring back the maximum number of hostages alive that we're able to do. I think that these people should think twice before they sow such hysteria among the general public, and particularly doing so to an outside source like the AP, I think is unforgivable. And I think that they should be reprimanded for doing so if we can find out who they are. There's been all sorts of talk over who it might be.
Right.
We'll wait and see. In terms of the pressure, I don't think there's any more diplomatic pressure that can be really applied that will bear fruit. I'm of the opinion that we need to intensify our operation inside the Gaza Strip, certainly inside Rafah and elsewhere. And in fact, we also need to target directly and pursue directly to the ends of the earth the leaders of Hamas. And quite frankly, we need to bring them home to Israel in body bags as well, because I think that's what the Israeli public demands. I'm sorry for being direct, but that's what we need here.
Well, we asked you a direct question, so appreciate your response. Stay with us. We are going to unpack more right now. Anti-government protesters are taking a stand again, reiterating their call for elections. Day 3 of a planned week of disruption. Demonstrators blocking roads again today. They are also calling for a deal that would see the release of all the hostages held by terrorists in Gaza. So for more, we now go live to correspondent Balia Sladin. He joins us from Jerusalem. Balia, day 3 of this week of disruption, protesters calling for elections in Israel and for a deal. So talk to us about what is happening right now. What can you share?
Let's take a quick look at what's happening here in front of the Knesset in Jerusalem. Thousands of people are gathering in front of the Knesset and calling for early election. This is the third day in a row, as you said, in this week of disruption. They are calling it officially the week of resistance, to resist this government, as they are saying. And they are here today for the third day, which is a day that started even at 8 a.m. this morning while they were protesting also in the governmental complex here in Jerusalem, as well as in the front of the Knesset. And later on even followed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in his visit to one of the towns here in Israel. So this week will witness lots of demonstration, lots of road blocking, as we said, and also is going to continue this way until Saturday, where the main protest takes place that has been taking place there on Saturday, every Saturday evening after Shabbat since the beginning of this war.
As you say, many events planned in the coming days as well. Meanwhile, now that the war cabinet is no longer, what is known about the political tensions within the walls of Parliament, pressure from far-right leaders over the war strategy? What can you tell us?
Yes, and that's exactly why we have seen that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dissolved the war cabinet. He is planning to hold only meetings with his war cabinet or former war cabinet members, excluding, of course, Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, maybe, of course, with Ron Dermer, with Der'i, with the heads of the Israeli security branches, and later on meet up with the wider cabinet that includes Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, because of this pressure that you're talking about. But let's face it, the situation didn't change much, because after all, Netanyahu anyway is relying on them for his government, for his coalition. He has 64 members, and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich has their number of members that can take down this government. So he is, anyway, before the war cabinet dissolved or after the war cabinet dissolved, he is dependent on them. That's why we're seeing also these protesters here today saying that every decision that Netanyahu is going to take right now is going to be a political decision, because after all, after Gantz and Eisenkot left this war cabinet, left this government, then there is no excuse for Netanyahu to say that his decisions are only for Israel's interest. So that's why we are seeing this number of protesters here, and they're citing specifically this issue of resignation of Gantz and Eisenkot.
Thank you so much. Live from Jerusalem, correspondent Balia Sladin. Thank you. And still in studio, Benjamin, I want to come to you. We are looking at a sea of flags. Once again, protest action the last few days, again for the rest of the week as well. We know the call. It's for elections to happen now. Your take on the pressure internally, politically right now. Who is making the decisions in terms of the war strategy? Is it any different? Your thoughts?
Well, firstly, I understand the desperate calls of the families of hostages for a deal to be done. I spoke about that just a moment ago during the prior segment. However, I think it's a terrible, misguided endeavour to conflate the issue of a hostage deal with the call for elections, because it has the default outcome of politicising what should remain apolitical, namely the return of our hostages. It's also problematic because we've had likely replacements in the event that this government were to fall in key positions since October 7th. Benny Gantz was a member of the War Cabinet. Gadi Eisenkot was an observer of the War Cabinet, 2 former chiefs of staff, 1 a former defence minister. They were not able to bring about a hostage deal. We've also had Yair Lapid, who has decided to sit out another possible replacement in the event that the government should change. He's been completely ineffective on the outside. I know from conversations I've had with family members of hostages that they'll sit with Yair Lapid, he'll talk to them, he'll listen to them, and then he'll say to them, make sure that you pressure Benjamin Netanyahu, but he doesn't have any new ideas to bring to the fore. In terms of the now disbanded war cabinet, that's an interesting development. When Benny Gantz left the unity government for the purpose of the war, That meant that the war cabinet no longer existed, almost by definition. There have been calls by Itamar Ben-Gvir to replace Benny Gantz. That would be an inappropriate selection. It's clear Prime Minister Netanyahu does not want that, and therefore there is no current war cabinet. It's very problematic.
Very problematic indeed. Avi Paznau, your thoughts on exactly that?
You would be surprised, Benita, to hear the time for unity.
That
we
would
are
not
in a time
surprise
of
me at
war.
all.
We are in a time of war. I don't like these images. What we need is unity. And you know, the call for election, I mean, first of all, how do you do election in the middle of the war? And then let's say you have election. It will take another 3 months to form a government, meaning we will be now 6 months without or with a transition government. It's not a good idea. The answer is unity. I, for example, am very sorry that Gantz and Eisenkot left the government. And I don't think it's too late for Netanyahu, maybe not today, maybe in 2 weeks, in a month, to call them back, to sit down with them, to see if they can join maybe additional forces, Lieberman, who knows, Lapid, I don't know. We are in a war and we need unity. I don't want to see images like that in the middle of the war. This is also what our enemy sees. I want unity. This is what I want.
That's exactly the thought, what this means for Hamas, for Hezbollah, specifically for Iran as well. Gentlemen, stay with us because we turn now to efforts to try to quell tensions across the northern front. U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein is calling for a diplomatic solution to the conflict between Israel and the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah. Now, he was speaking in Beirut earlier on Tuesday, a day after having meetings in Jerusalem. More in this report by our Jody Natilovitz.
As a result of the escalation in cross-border fire between Hezbollah and the IDF along Lebanon's southern border in recent weeks, U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein has been dispatched in an attempt to ease tensions, paying visits to both countries this week. Following meetings in Jerusalem on Monday and Beirut on Tuesday, Hochstein said Washington is looking to avoid the, quote, greater war.
That is the effort here. It will take everyone's interest in ending this conflict now, and we believe that there is a pathway diplomatically to do it, if the sides agree to it.
Last month, U.S. President Joe Biden outlined a truce proposal, which Hochstein said would ultimately be the end of the conflict in Gaza, adding that a swift diplomatic solution is both necessary and attainable.
A ceasefire in Gaza and/or an alternative diplomatic solution could also bring the conflict across the blue line to an end, creating conditions for displaced Lebanese civilians to go home in the south and for Israeli civilians to go home in their north.
After a meeting with Hochstein, the Prime Minister of Lebanon said his country was not interested in further escalation. The question, however, is whether the pro-Iranian Hezbollah terror group is.
So for more, we now go live to correspondent Zach Anders. He joins us from northern Israel. And we just heard there, of course, Amos Hochstein, the U.S. envoy, wrapping up that visit to Beirut. So, yes, while Prime Minister Najib Mikati may not want further escalation, Hezbollah may think very differently. We heard red alert sirens in northern communities just a short while ago and earlier in the day too. So what is the latest there? What can you tell us, Zach?
Yeah, and it seems like Hezbollah sending a message that they are still in charge politically inside Lebanon, especially with this decision to not fire for 2 days. Sunday morning was the last time that we saw any considerable attack. That was the last time there was an alarm, last time Hezbollah claimed responsibility in those early morning hours just after midnight, Sunday a.m. And then with that period of calm, you get the arrival of the U.S. Special Envoy into Beirut, meets with political leaders inside Lebanon. And then as that plane is leaving Beirut, the attacks pick up, and continue again. So a very political message being sent by Hezbollah in these moments. The attacks at this point in the night, we have not seen any reports of casualty or any significant damage. There have been fires. I'm told that they are mostly under control. Again, it's hot here, and it's going to be a very hot summer. So every time we get an attack now, our attention turns to whether or not these are starting wildland fires. And that's, again, what we saw today.
And talking about messaging, earlier in the day, Hezbollah publishing a video showing aerial footage of the Haifa port. That seems like a pretty threatening move. What's being made of that?
Yeah, and I've all throughout the afternoon, I've cautioned that this footage appears to be taken with a commercial drone. I've flown these DJI, these Mavic drones for years and years, and it looks like this is taken with a commercial drone. We're still waiting. I mean, we've spoken to some sources on the IDF side that are very concerned about this and wanted to stress that all possibilities are still there. My personal belief is, based on the footage alone, that this does not look like a drone that flew all the way from Lebanon, that this looks like a drone that was launched from Israel proper and filmed some of these sites. I think that might be more concerning, perhaps, given the circumstances that would allow for something like that to happen. To film over military installations, to film over naval bases, that's a huge concern. But you got to remember, these drones with these cameras that are very good can fit in the palm of your hand and reach altitudes of 3,000, 4,000 feet sometimes and go 20, 30 miles an hour. They're very well equipped drones. They got about a 25, 35 minute lifespan before they have to return again. But this is the kind of footage that we always see with commercial drones. So I'm very reticent to say that this is a drone that flew out from Lebanon, circled these sites, and returned. We don't have any dates for any of this footage for when it was taken either. But it really is concerning for the fact that you're getting live images of some of the movement on the ground. Maybe not so much the images, because you got to remember that there are commercial satellites, Airbus, Maxar, Planet, another private company, that take photographs of the Earth, all around the Earth, every single day. And these are commercially acceptable, accessible images to anybody with an account for some of these services. And so you can see these sites through the satellites, and you can see some of the movement day to day because these satellites are taking daily pictures.
Right.
We talked to the IDF this afternoon trying to figure out if these pictures can be blurred from the IDF end, and we haven't heard back yet, but that's something we see in the States. The U.S. government blurs some of their military installations.
On top of all the latest developments and images, thank you as always, correspondent Zach Anders, live there from northern Israel. Benjamin Anthony, your take on Amos Hochstein. He's been in Jerusalem, he's been in Beirut, he's now left Beirut. The urgency to get some kind of outcome there.
I don't like it. I'm so sorry. I don't like what I'm seeing from Hochstein for a number of reasons. Firstly, I don't like the terminology to end the conflict across the blue line, because implicit within that is a return to an unacceptable status quo that has begotten a situation where 60 to 80,000 of our citizens are basically refugees in their own land. That's the first. The second thing is, it wasn't mentioned in the report as far as I heard, but Hochstein has taken the time to meet with Benny Gantz, again, and Yair Lapid, opposition to the Prime Minister. Why is he doing that? Why is he coordinating with Benny Gantz now that he's no longer in the War Cabinet? Prior to him leaving, I could understand that, but not now. Why is he coordinating with Yair Lapid? What's afoot there? I think real questions need to be asked about that from the American perspective about domestic Israeli political leadership. And the last thing I want people to understand here, and I don't say this as a personal attack against Hochstein, keep in mind, Americans will not have to live with a poorly put together ceasefire agreement. Israelis will have to live with the ramifications of that. We're already doing so after 1701, Resolution 1701. Ultimately, we'll have to defeat them in Gaza, and we'll have to defeat them in southern Lebanon.
Your thoughts, Avi, on exactly that?
On exactly that, I too, to my great regret, I'm not very optimistic about the result of Hochstein's mission, simply because of the fact that for the moment the Hezbollah has no incentive to stop the war. How can we stop the war with the Hezbollah? How can we really get a real agreement? We have to end the operation in Gaza. And it will be done, I believe, in the next few weeks. And then concentrate troops on our Lebanese border. And then maybe call Hochstein to come again and tell the Hezbollah, look, if you guys don't withdraw from where you are beyond the Litani, here is what Israel is going to do to you. That's the only way to get an agreement with them.
Israeli defense leaders promised a hot summer. It looks like things certainly are going to be hotting up, no doubt about it. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Stay with us. Right now, we're taking a very quick break. When we get back, our coverage continues on this breaking news edition. 2 minutes and we're back. Stay tuned.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its 4th channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
Welcome back. Our coverage continues. Just before the break, we were talking about U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein being in Beirut for meetings, a day after meetings in Jerusalem. We can now confirm he's back in Israel and has just wrapped up a meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu. So we wait to see the outcome of the latest round of meetings, one of his umpteenth meetings to the region since this war started. Now, the latest out of the U.S. and the controversy over arms sales to Israel. 2 key Democrats have approved a major arms sale to Israel that includes 50 F-15 fighter jets. The Washington Post saying Representative Gregory Meeks and Senator Ben Cardin have signed off on that deal under heavy pressure from the Biden administration after the 2 lawmakers had held up that sale for months. Here's the latest response from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
That's a clear message. So for more, let's go live to New York. We cross to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Good to see you, Mike. So we just heard there Benjamin Netanyahu saying while he appreciates the support of the U.S. that it's been giving Israel throughout this war, he's slamming the fact the administration has been withholding these weapons and ammunitions in recent months. But now it's a green light to this major arms sales boost, and it's about $18 billion worth. So what bottlenecks have been ironed out to get this approval right now?
It wasn't really a bottleneck per se, Benita, and it's not even been cleared yet if you want to call it a bottleneck. There is what's called a tiered review process when there's a request for weapons transfers that go from the administrative level of the White House to the U.S. Congress. And there's an informal process before the formal process even starts. As part of that informal process, you go to the Republican and Democratic heads of the Armed Services Committees, the Armed Forces Committees within the respective Houses and Senate, and to the Foreign Affairs or Foreign Relations Committee, depending on if it's the House or the Senate. And you go to the Democratic and Republican heads, you present them with what's happening, and you essentially have to get their nod of approval first. That's before it goes to the full committees and then the full House and Senate. Everybody gets to stick their beak into the matter, but it needs to go through this informal process first. That's the only thing it's really cleared so far. It is an important step because everything could be killed at that level. But finally, Gregory Meeks, the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and Ben Cardin, the chair and top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, finally gave the thumbs up. And a combination of apparently what was some arm twisting from the Biden administration and also apparently some alleviation of concerns that those weapons, the F-15s, would not be used in some destructive manner in highly populated areas in Gaza, which seemed kind of implausible to begin with, and especially since they won't be delivered for 5 years. God willing, the Israel-Hamas war will be over in 5 years. So those concerns were alleviated in one form or fashion. Now it will go to a more formal process, which again is multi-layered in fashion.
Multi-layered indeed. Mike, progressive critics of the Biden administration say it hasn't used the U.S. leverage, so to speak, effectively in the war when it comes to the intensity of the fighting and, of course, getting aid into Gaza as well, all in an election year. So how much of an issue is this U.S. support of Israel shaping up to becoming come November?
I know you and I, and the people we work with and the people that watch our channel obviously have a major interest in the region. However, I hate to say it, the larger U.S. populace, it's low on their list in terms of support or lack of support of Israel. It's just not as high. And the ones that either support or don't support a particular candidate for their support or lack of support of Israel, they already made their minds up. There's very little that Joe Biden could do this way or that way that's really going to sway anybody's vote at this point in time. So in the bigger picture, not much. There are those very, very fringe voters who may not have made up their mind, who maybe want to vote for Biden but concerned about long-term repercussions for Israel, may want to vote for Trump, but sometimes he says things that are a little bit off the handle, as we know, and may give them cause for but we're talking about a very, very small fraction of voters. Could they make a difference in an incredibly close race in a swing state? Theoretically, I'm just not sure at this point in time, though, that it's going to make any factor in the presidential election race. However, it could have an impact in House races, which, of course, could have a major impact on how the next president can actually govern or not govern in their 4 years.
Also likely to be an issue in that debate everyone will be watching before the end of the month. Thank you so much, senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, live from New York. Thank you, Mike.
Now, from New York, we head to Paris. Updates out of France right now. First, Paris banned Israeli delegates and companies from taking part in a global weapons exhibition. Now, it's walking back that ban, giving the green light to Israeli participation at the Eurosatory International Arms event. But the initial court's decision has already caused a severe blow to Israeli companies and to Israeli-French relations. Correspondent Guy Azriel has more.
Eurosatory is one of the largest international exhibitions for land and air-land defense and security. For Israel, where defense industries are a central component of the high-tech sector, this is a particularly significant event. But this year, Israelis were initially not welcomed, after a district court in France ordered to bar Israeli arms companies, Israeli delegates, and intermediaries from attending the event. Although the decision was reversed on Tuesday, it is still a severe blow to 74 Israeli companies that were slated to take part at the exhibition, among them Attis Aviation, a small startup company dedicated to unmanned aerial vehicle development.
As a small company, we are considering very carefully our expenses. The purpose of us to go to the exhibition were to meet with end users and to find investors to invest in our company, if it's corporate companies or individual investors that are looking for startups to invest in. We are currently in the seed fundraising campaign. And therefore this was one of our main goals in this exhibition. We also booked tickets, hotels in the Paris area, because we are a small company, so we went for the low cost. Low cost usually cannot cancel, and now we lost all those expenses.
The initial ruling by the French court extended a previous decision by the government to ban the participation of Israeli companies in the exhibition, allegedly over Israel's military activity in Rafah.
It's discrimination against everything. Based on what? Based on completely exaggerated accusations, unfounded accusations, slander.
So the first decision of the French government, it was said it's because the war in Gaza. And basically it's obviously from the false or the wrong narrative of the pro-Palestinian organizations. But the second decision that no Israeli citizens or representatives of Israeli companies can enter the exhibition, this already is a different decision. We see this decision as an anti-Israeli decision, even anti-Semitic decision.
The Israel ban at Eurosatory was only the latest in a series of unfriendly French policies against Israel since the start of the war. Earlier last week, Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant slammed President Macron's initiative to establish a trilateral task force to defuse tensions with Hezbollah in Lebanon, saying, quote, "As we fight a just war defending our people, France has adopted hostile policies against Israel."
On a diplomatic level, it is impossible to put such a hostile decision on the agenda in a Western country, an ally country. It should have consequences. The French government must pay a diplomatic price for its conduct.
Regardless of the reversal of the ban, the entire saga shows that the war is also shifting to the business sector, and this front is heating up every day.
And still in studio, Avi Pazner, as a former Israeli ambassador to France, you are well placed to give some kind of insight into what Paris and Emmanuel Macron are playing at here.
First of all, I want to say that there is some misunderstanding about the decision of today. Today, only the decision not to let Israeli private people enter was reversed.
Right.
But there was no reverse. That Israel cannot attend the show. Israel does not attend the show. And this is an unacceptable boycott of Israel by a friendly country, by France. And it was done, in my view, at the decision of President Macron, before the European election, trying to bank on anti-Israeli sentiment in some part of the French electorate. This is a scandalous decision. It hurts Israel, and it's the first time that France applies a boycott. This is a boycott. Benita, a boycott against Israel. You know, it reminds me a little bit of de Gaulle's embargo back in '67. Then it was worse because we were surrounded by enemies. We had the knife on us. But now you have the first time that a major European country boycotts Israel, even if it is only on the arms deal. This is a precedent which is dangerous, and I also believe that Israel has to act forcefully. Now we have a very delicate period in France. They have elections, because Macron has called snap elections after what happened. But we will have to engage the French government on this question and not to let it pass, and be happy that the higher court lets private Israeli visit the fair. This is not enough.
And this is the same France, Benjamin, that is supposedly in talks to try and quell tensions, of course, between Lebanon and Israel, obviously with Hezbollah at play there. Your thoughts on what's really being said here by France with this kind of ban and change of tune?
Well, first of all, Minister Yoav Gallant was absolutely right, not only to dismiss France's gambit at having this trilateral contact force supervise what was going on between Israel and Hezbollah inside southern Lebanon, not only to dismiss it, but also to say why. Macron's adopted a very hostile stance towards Israel in terms of his rhetoric, in terms of what's going on in France. Just to really address myself to the elephant in the room. Look, we saw the EU shift to the right, and commentator after commentator said that it was over the issue of immigration. Let's be very, very clear. It's over an issue descending from immigration called Islamification. European Union countries are deeply concerned about how they appease the ever-rising Islamic presence within their own borders. And Macron is cynically, and he will not remain in a group of one, cynically trying to punish Israel in order to placate the anti-Israel movement within his own borders that has come by way of the gradual seeping Islamification of the continent of Europe. Everybody should be concerned about it. The ambassador hearkened back to what this reminded him of in terms of it being a boycott. I want to talk prospectively. I think, and I think Israel needs to get itself ready to combat this, that within 12 to 16 years, based roughly on the election cycle of presidents in the United States of America, if something doesn't change, we could well see the rounding of the international community against the States of Israel by way of sanctions similar to those that we justifiably saw against South Africa during its apartheid era, unjustifiably so against the State of Israel for defending itself. One final thought. We made a catastrophic mistake by pausing our fight inside the Gaza Strip around Ramadan. We should have pushed on, pressed on, because no level of restraint or accommodation by Israel satisfies those who come to criticize us.
The goals for the IDF in Gaza remain. Benjamin, Anthony, Avi Pasner, thank you both so much. As always, appreciate your insights into all these developing stories in terms of the security situation across this region. Thank you both for being here in studio. Now, those details around that daring daytime rescue mission in Gaza earlier this month continue to emerge. 4 Israeli hostages rescued while under heavy fire after 8 months in captivity. An Israeli Air Force pilot who participated in the rescue of Andrei Kozlov, Almog Meyajan, and Shlomi Ziv from a civilian apartment is now recounting the moments they boarded his helicopter. In this interview, he recounts what he calls a special moment, knowing they were in safe hands at last. Let's take a look.
I knew the amount of hostages that were supposed to be released, and I didn't know their names because of the sensitive of this operation. Very few people in the army knew the names and the identity of the hostages that were supposed to be released. Thanks to the excellent ground troops that we have inside Gaza Strip, our landing and our loading of the 3 hostages lasted less than 1 minute. When I first saw the 3 hostages, Shlomi, Almog, and Andrei, walking in the helicopter, I felt relief and happiness that surrounded the whole team, the whole helicopter team that were in this mission. As we were landing in Gaza coast, I looked back and I saw the 3 hostages coming in the helicopter. I looked at Shlomi, and as soon as we took off, I looked him in the eyes and I gave him thumbs up, wanted to signal him that it's all right, he's coming home. And well, I remember this feeling since the operation. I can't stop thinking about it. During the flight to the hospital, I looked back and I saw Shlomi looking out of the window. So I asked the crew chief that was beside him if Shlomi wants to get in the cockpit and talk with us. So we let him in. We gave him an earphones, and we had a 10-minute conversation with an hostage that just released from captivity. We didn't talk about the captivity. We talked about what we see. I explained him about the helicopter. I told him it's a pretty simple helicopter, and we shared a pretty special moment. The entire team and Shlomi in this flight. Yeah. Almog and Andre were extremely happy. They were sitting here looking out of the window and seeing Israel from the air after 8 months of being held in Hamas captivity, and they were extremely happy and joyful. Yeah, I feel honored and privileged to be a part of an operation that eventually managed to bring back 4 hostages back to their families and their loved ones. June 8th, the day of the operation, was my birthday, and I'm positive that it's the best present that I could get.
What a birthday indeed. Now, it's been astounding hearing details of how that daring rescue operation was conducted in broad daylight earlier this month, bringing 4 hostages back home where they belong after more than 8 harrowing months in captivity. And following that dramatic rescue of Noah Argamani, Andrei Kozlov, Almog Meirjan and Shlomi Ziv, more details are now known about the physical and psychological trauma hostages are enduring. Compounding the situation, a top Israeli doctor linked to the Hostages and Missing Families Forum has this week told a parliament committee that there is still no plan for rehabilitating hostages who have been released or rescued from Hamas captivity. And now for more, we welcome Miriam Shkler, the Executive Director at the Tel Aviv Crisis Center for Sexual Assault, joining us from Tel Aviv. Miriam, thank you so much for joining us. The urgency to get all the hostages home could not be more clear. Earlier in this broadcast, in fact, we heard from Amit Sassana, who of course was freed in the first hostage deal, speaking out about the horrors she endured in captivity. Now, of course, she'd spoken to the New York Times before, but now she's speaking to a White House conference, and she says it's harder to stay silent than it is to speak. Your response to her chilling testimony, so powerful.
It's extremely powerful, and it's not to be taken for granted at all, because it's a huge endeavor and it's really, really, really difficult journey. Most survivors of sexual assault are not able at all to come forward with their story because of the stigma, because of the price that they pay. That's been one of the biggest tragedies of this entire massacre and atrocity and everything that's happened since October 7th, because anyone that deals with sexual assault knows that it's a very, 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 very difficult process. And it's something that has horrifying implications on the soul and on the body, and it's really difficult for people to come forward. They're filled with shame. There's a huge price for them to pay, as I said. And so part of what was going on after October 7th was, with the world's denial of sexual assault, there was increasing pressure on survivors to come forward, which is not the natural course for most survivors. Most survivors need a lot of time to process what happened, to be able to take their own pace without having to feel like they have to be the martyr, or they have to be somebody that's actually being used in a way to show what happened and so that people believe us.
Right.
That's one of the big tragedies of what happened, because in this case, what happened on October 7th, we have way, way, way more evidence than we ever have in cases of sexual assault. Normally, it's cases of he said, she said. Here we have testimonies of pathologists. We had testimonies of hostages. We had testimonies of doctors who examined, of people of Zaka who examined. We had eyewitness testimonies of gang rapes.
Right.
We had the terrorists themselves with their footage and with their testimonies. And there was a horrible amount of pressure still by the world that was denying what was going on, that they weren't believing it, or if it happened, it was justified because of the occupation. And there was a huge amount of pressure on survivors to come forward, which is just not something that is that can be good in any way for survivors.
And to that exact point, there seemed to be a deafening silence. And as you say, Hamas themselves filmed the atrocities, the depravity, the brutality on the 7th of October. And yet we didn't hear from women's groups. We didn't hear from international human rights organizations. At this conference, this White House conference, Kamala Harris, the vice president, speaking about what she'd heard, speaking about Amit and her courage. She says, Kamala Harris says, that maybe when more hostages are released, there will be more testimonies like this. Well, that is a worry for her, but that won't surprise anybody here. Of course, there would be more testimonies. What do you make of the fact that it's taken world leaders, including female world leaders, so long to hear what happened, to listen to what happened on the 7th of October?
That's been one of the tragedies of this whole, as if there haven't been enough tragedies, but that's been one of the most overwhelmingly horrible facts about what's happening, and it's been impossible for us to wrap our heads around it. How is it possible for all of these feminist organizations, these human rights organizations, these people who have been advancing the whole Me Too movement and the whole point of that we believe victims, we believe survivors, and all of a sudden that all that just was just thrown down the drain. We don't believe them anymore. And what we saw is the people that were saying it didn't happen at all, or it happened and it's justified because of the occupation. There's never, ever, ever an excuse for rape. And the fact that people are making excuses or not wanting to believe it, or putting all kinds of categories and classifications and if and buts, that's been one of the horrible the results of what's been going on. And the fact that she was able to speak at the White House and have such powerful support from Kamala Harris, that's something that was obviously extremely empowering. But again, it's a big, huge price to ask for survivors, and they shouldn't be having to make that sacrifice. Obviously, if it does good for someone, each person should have to make their own choice. And if it's something that's on the journey of healing, that's great. But like Amit said, that the staying silence is just so horrifying, because it's impossible to believe that the world still does not believe or is denying what happened.
Horrifying indeed. And Amit herself says she cannot heal as long as the captives there continue to suffer. And she's promising, obviously, to do everything she can to urge for some kind of deal, to some kind of good news, to make sure that there can be some kind of outcome that gets all the hostages back home. Very briefly, there is a disturbing concern. We heard that top health expert, Dr. Haggai Levine, saying that no one is responsible for the rehabilitation of freed and rescued hostages here in Israel. Briefly, is that your assessment, your take on how prepared Israel is to help deal with hostages, survivors, people coming home, people rescued?
I think we're going to see a huge, huge, huge overflow of just trauma all over the place that people are going to be needed to be taken care of. People who are in captivity, people who suffered from October 7th. We saw what happened in the first few months, that the government didn't function at all. This is going to take an entire society is in complete trauma. We're not talking about post-trauma. Everybody's in the thick of the trauma right now. And what looks ahead for us, what's in store is just even way, way, way more challenging than what we've seen until today. And there has to be some sort of government program to help take care of all of these people in the trauma, definitely the hostages, but not just. People have just suffered horrible, horrible trauma from everything that happened on October 7th, and survivors of sexual assault in general have been severely, severely triggered by these events. It doesn't even need to be people who are taken hostage. It's these entire events are extremely triggery and extremely detrimental to survivors in general.
Miriam Shkler, we could discuss this
before we
hours.
go. It's just extremely important for me, anyone that's hearing me, if we're talking about trigger, We have the rape crisis centers all over Israel. 1202, a line for women. 1203, a line for men. We're here for you. We believe you. We want to hear you. Please call.
Thank you so much. Miriam Shkler, appreciate you speaking to us on I-24 News. Thank you. And that is a wrap. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its 4th channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST,